They said she was too wild to keep a home, too wild to be a wife, too wild to be mourned when she left town with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and a half-burnt letter she never finished reading. They called her Claire Monroe, though that wasn't her name by birth. She had taken it the way stray dogs take shelter, not because it fit, but because it helped her survive. It was the first snowfall of December, when the townsfolk finally turned their backs. Bitter winds swept through Dry Creek, snapping shutters and dragging frost into every cracked corner of the old mining shacks. But Claire didn't shiver. She sat on the back steps of an abandoned saloon, coat too thin, boots too big, and eyes too tired to cry. The night before, she'd been accused of stealing whiskey and drawing a pistol on the deputy. She hadn't done either, but truth was a currency no one spent on women like her. The saloon had burned half to the ground last spring. Nobody rebuilt it, just like no one had rebuilt her after the baby died, or after her mother was buried without a name, or after the man she thought would marry her disappeared with a redhead and a full saddlebag of silver. Now she was the only thing left in Dry Creek more stubborn than the wind. She stood slowly, the letter crumpled in her gloved hand, edges blackened from the fire she tried to start the night before. It had only warmed her long enough to remember the handwriting. He had written to her once. Jacob Hawthorne. The name tasted like regret and pine sap. He'd been a rancher, 3 Valleys West, silent type, built like a man who'd never known luxury, but somehow made you feel safer just by standing near. They had met once, briefly, but she remembered the way he looked at her, not like she was broken, but like she was burning and beautiful all the same. Claire swung up onto a horse. The wind howled. Snow turned the world white. She didn't look back, because in the end, no one begged her to stay, and maybe that was mercy. She rolled into the storm like someone who'd been running her whole life, but for the first time, she wasn't just running from. She was running to. The road west was unforgiving. Claire's supplies were thin, and her horse was old. But she knew how to hunt and how to make a fire out of frozen brush. Each night she slept beneath the stars, she remembered her mother's lullaby, the one about women who turned into rivers when they were too sad to stay still. On the 4th night, she saw smoke. It spiraled up between the hills, lazy and silver. Her pulse quickened. She thought of bandits, wolves, but something else tugged at her chest, an echo of hope so fragile it made her angry. She followed the smoke and found the ranch. Stone posts, wood beams darkened with age, chickens clucking beneath the porch. And there he was, standing beneath the awning, hammer in hand, face half shadowed by a weathered hat. Jacob Hawthorne. He didn't move when he saw her, just stared. Claire wanted to speak, say anything, but the words caught in her throat like frost. So she did the only thing she could. She took off her hat, lowered her eyes, and whispered like a child, "I ain't got anywhere else to go." And Jacob, that silent man with hands like carved oak and eyes like unsettled sky, nodded once. Not out of pity, but because he'd been waiting.
The High Plains, summer, 1877, on the edge of nowhere. The sun dipped low, bleeding copper and rose across the open sky. Dust curled around Evelyn's boots as her horse trotted down the ridge trail beyond the edge of town. She rode alone, as she always did, just her, the wind, and the whip of prairie grass brushing the stirrups. Out here, she didn't have to shrink herself to fit. They called her wild, not for breaking laws or betraying hearts. No, Evelyn was wild in the way storms were wild, untamed, vast, alive. She could outshoot most men, whisper a frightened colt into stillness, and once saved a drowning boy with nothing but a rope and her bare grit. But instead of respect, the town whispered behind her back, "She's too much, too loud, too free. No man will ever keep her." What they really meant was that Evelyn refused to be owned. She remembered once, leaning over a barbed fence, repairing it alone while the sun blistered her skin, when old Mrs. Hargrove passed by in her wagon and muttered, "A woman like that ends up alone or buried early." Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't even look up. She just kept working, jaw tight, as the wind blew dust into her eyes. And yet, in moments like this, with the land endless before her, she didn't feel lost. She felt found. But that night changed something. It began with nothing more than a glance, a nod. She had been loading salt blocks into a wheelbarrow outside Mercer's trading post when she first saw him, a tall, broad-shouldered rancher with eyes like unsettled thunderclouds, quiet, still, watching. No comment on her strength, no lazy flirtation, just presence, just seeing her. That was new. The next day, on the rise above Dry Creek, he rode up beside her, didn't smile, didn't crowd her, just reached over and handed her a canteen like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then he turned and rode on, dust in the wake of his horse. She didn't know his name, not yet. But she knew this: he hadn't tried to change her, impress her, or claim her. He had simply met her pace. That night, Evelyn sat on the edge of her cabin porch, boots still laced, fingers brushing the cool tin of the canteen he'd left her. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. A lone coyote howled in the distance, but this time the sound didn't feel lonely. It felt free.
And that's when the memory came back. She was 15, still trying to mold herself into what people expected, wearing dresses that itched, smiling too wide, biting her tongue until it bled. Her mother had tried to soften her, taught her to pour tea and lower her gaze. But Evelyn had never been made for silence. One Sunday, a visiting preacher had come to town. The whole congregation packed into the white clapboard church, sweating in their good clothes. Evelyn had slipped out during the sermon, boots crunching behind the building. She'd needed air, freedom. Behind the church, she found a dying hawk. Its wing was twisted, eyes fierce but body shaken. And as she knelt down, something in her shifted. She knew that bird. She was that bird. She didn't go back into the church. Instead, she wrapped the hawk in her scarf and carried it home, nursed it for weeks until it to fly again. Her father had shaken his head and muttered, "You'll never be tame, girl," as if that was a curse. But now, years later, she knew it had been a blessing. Back to the present. The days turned long and golden. The man from the ridge kept showing up, never with words, just gestures. He'd repair her fence without asking, leave fresh oats for her horse. Once, after a storm, she found a warm wool blanket folded neatly on her porch rail. Still no name, but Evelyn had learned to read actions louder than words. And then came the evening she saw him vulnerable. She was riding along the river's edge when she heard the whimper of a dog. Sliding off her horse, she followed the sound and found the man
kneeling, trying to set a splint for a limping hound with a bloodied paw. The man looked up at her, startled, then ashamed. "It's not mine," he said finally, "but she followed me. I couldn't leave her." Evelyn knelt down without speaking, helped him tie the bandage with torn strips from her own shirt sleeve. The dog licked both their hands when they were done. That night, sitting beside the fire outside her cabin, the man finally spoke again. "My name's Carson." Just that. And Evelyn? She didn't smile, didn't flutter. She just nodded, slow and sure. "Evelyn," she replied. And in that moment, it felt like they were more than two names passing in the wind. They were two storms that had finally stopped circling and met in the stillness between. Because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't too wild. She just hadn't met someone strong enough to ride beside her without trying to break her. And now, she had.
3 weeks later, High Ridge Trail, Wyoming territory. The mountains had softened with summer heat and wild lupines crept up the hills like lilac smoke. Evelyn rode alone at dawn, wind in her braid, rifle slung behind her back, eyes sharp and heart strangely quiet. Quiet, not empty. She didn't quite know how it happened, not when it began, nor how it grew. But Carson had folded himself into her life like he belonged there, without ever asking permission, without ever needing to prove anything. He was just there, not taming her, not fixing her, just standing beside her like a steady pine in a restless wind. They hadn't touched, not once, not in the ways townsfolk thought mattered. No kisses, no lace, no coy glances across firelight. But Evelyn felt seen in a way she never had, and it terrified her, because being seen meant being known, and being known meant being left once the knowing got too real. She'd lived out before. So the night he handed her a saddlebag full of hand-forged nails, saying only, "Figured yours were low," Evelyn thanked him with a quiet nod and then didn't sleep a wink for the next 2 nights. Because kindness like that, unasked, unsaid, unclaimed, it cracked something open, and part of her, maybe the last soft part, was still bleeding from old wounds. She remembered her first bruised heartbreak, a schoolteacher from the East with city hands and a polished smile. He'd said he liked how different she was, said she was fresh air out here. But the first time she outshot him at the town fair, he'd sulked for 3 days. When she refused to quit the rodeo, he called her embarrassing. When she beat 2 ranchers in poker using her own damn cattle money, he left her a letter. "I need a woman I can protect, Evelyn, not one who doesn't need anyone." That was the night she burned the letter without reading it twice and stopped trying to be readable.
Now, under the slope of High Ridge, Evelyn reached the old pine where she used to camp as a girl. The breeze smelled like sap and memory. She dismounted slowly, leading her mare to water. A few minutes passed, and then she heard it. Hoofbeats. One rider. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Carson stopped his horse beside her without a word. They stood like that a long while, not quite speaking, not quite alone. Then he said it. "You always look like you belong here, like this land knows your name." Evelyn swallowed. A hawk cried above them, tracing circles in the sky. "I reckon it's the only place that doesn't try to change me," she replied. Carson didn't smile, just looked at her with that same patient gaze.
I wouldn't change a thing about you." The words shouldn't have rattled her, but they did, deep down in her bones. So she did what she always did when she was scared. She picked a fight. "You don't know me that well," she said, sharper than she meant. But he didn't flinch. "I know how you move, how you don't ask for help, even when you're limping. I've seen how you talk to horses, like you're listening more than commanding. I know you got walls so thick, even light don't get in sometimes." He paused. "And I know that's not wild. That's survival." Evelyn froze. Something inside her, a wall, a wound, a weight, shifted. "Don't try to fix me, Carson," she whispered. "I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to ride with you, if you'll let me." She didn't answer right away, couldn't. But she didn't ride away either. That night, rain came. Not a storm, just a steady, soft rain, like the sky was weeping slow and quiet. Evelyn lit a fire inside a cabin, sitting cross-legged in her undershirt, hair unbraided for the first time in weeks. The scent of wet cedar drifted in through the windows. She thought about his words, about survival, about how maybe, just maybe, love didn't have to mean shrinking. Maybe it meant being held while you stayed exactly as you were. She touched the stitched blanket he'd left months ago, the one she'd kept folded on the end of her bed. She hadn't used it, not once, until now. That night she wrapped it around her shoulders, and she slept like the land finally trusted her back. But peace, as Evelyn knew well, never lasted long in the West. The trouble came with a sharp whistle and a shadow on the ridge. A cattle-rustling gang had been prowling the valley, stripping fences, branding stolen stock, riding with blood in their teeth. Carson's ranch had been hit once. Evelyn's had been skipped, maybe out of luck, or maybe out of fear. She had a reputation for shooting first and digging graves later. But this time they weren't after cows. They were after land. And land meant her.
It began with a fire. Small, controlled, set downwind, meant to scare. Evelyn was out hunting that evening and came back to see black smoke curling over her east pasture. She didn't hesitate. She rode straight through it, bandana over her face, rifle in hand. By the time she reached the flame line, she found one of the boys, barely 19, scarred up, teeth yellow as corn husks, trying to spook her mare into bolting. She didn't shoot. She just stared him down until he dropped the torch and ran. But Evelyn knew they'd be back. She didn't call the sheriff. She didn't ride into town. She rode straight to Carson's. He was in the barn, sleeves rolled, stacking bales. When he saw her, something shifted in his face, like the sun breaking behind storm clouds. She didn't wait. "They're testing my land," she said. "Next time, it won't be a fire." Carson nodded. "I'll saddle up." That was it. No questions, no fear, no talk of safety. Just two people ready to stand side by side. They waited that night, rifles across their laps, sitting on her porch in silence. The moon hung low and red like a hunter's eye. At one point, Evelyn leaned back, head resting against the wood post. Her shoulder brushed his, just barely, but it stayed there, and for once she didn't pull away. Carson didn't move. He just let her lean. And in that quiet, between breath, wind, In the waiting, something bloomed. Not romance, not yearning. Something truer. Belonging.
That night, Holt sat out by the corral long after the horses had settled. The lantern beside him gave off a soft, golden hum, and the fireflies blinked lazily in the grass. He sipped slow from his tin cup, not because he was cold, but because something about this day wouldn't leave him alone. Eliza. There was a fight in her. He'd seen it from the first moment she'd stepped into his barn, hands stained with dust, eyes full of defiance. But now there was something else, too. A sorrow he didn't yet have a name for. A silence between her words and an ache behind her strength. He didn't know what made him stand. Didn't even feel his boots move toward the house. But there he was, knuckles rapping lightly against the edge of her door. "Yeah?" came her voice, low and guarded. "I brought you something," he said. When she opened the door, she was barefoot again, hair down around her shoulders like shadowed wheat. Holt held out a small leather pouch. "Mama gave it to me, said it held courage. Used to wear it under her dress when Pa went off to war." Eliza hesitated. "Why give it to me?" "Because I reckon you've used all yours up, and I'd like to see you stay." She took it gently, hands trembling just a little. Her thumb brushed over the worn leather as if it had carried someone's heartbeat once. Maybe it still did. Inside was a coin, dull and bent, a tiny feather, and a dried sprig of lavender. She swallowed. "Thank you." But what she meant was, "Why are you the first person who sees me and doesn't want to change me?" They didn't say much else, just stood there in the quiet, the stars drawing silver maps above them. Eventually she closed the door, but left it unlocked that night. Small gesture, huge meaning. And across the prairie, the wind softened. The next morning, Holt found her already up, mending an old saddle by the barn. The leather straps were stiff and cracked, but her hands moved with a patience he hadn't seen before. "You fixin' that for me?" he asked with a grin. "I'm fixin' it so your horses don't toss you off," she replied, not looking up. That was the moment he knew. Not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't say. She was staying. Maybe not forever, but long enough to mend what had been broken. In leather, in bone, in herself.
There was no final turning point, no thunderclap or gunshot to mark when everything changed. But change it did. Each day after, Eliza rose before the sun. She didn't do it to impress anyone. She did it because it gave her peace. The first warmth on her face, the scent of dew on wild grass, the sound of a restless colt in the next paddock. It reminded her that she belonged somewhere. Maybe not to anyone, but somewhere. She helped Holt mend fences after a spring storm blew down half the line. They worked in silence mostly, passing nails and twine, lifting splintered wood. But their silences weren't the same as before. They were comfortable now, thick with unsaid truths and something slow burning beneath the surface. One evening, as they were closing up the barn, Holt turned to her. "You ever think about leaving? Starting fresh somewhere?" She wiped sweat from her brow. "Every day." He nodded slowly. "But you don't?" She looked at him, really looked at him. "No, I don't." A beat. And then he asked quietly, "Why?" And for once she didn't dodge it, didn't crack a joke or change the subject. Instead, she let the truth settle in her chest, warm and raw. "Because this is the first place where I'm not someone to be tamed." He didn't smile, didn't speak,
just reached for her calloused hand and gave it a gentle squeeze, like grounding a wild bird, not caging it. Weeks passed, then came the fire. Lightning struck the eastern field. The dry brush went up fast. Holt rode out first, shouting for water and men, but Eliza didn't wait. She grabbed buckets, covered her mouth in wet cloth, and ran straight into the smoke. She didn't hesitate. She fought the fire like she had fought everything in her life, with all teeth and heart. And when her boots gave out and her skin burned red, she still didn't stop. Not until the last flame sputtered and died in the ash-soaked soil. Holt found her collapsed in the dirt, coughing so hard her ribs shook. But her eyes were clear, fierce, alive. She saved half the herd. No one called her wild after that. They called her brave. They called her a hell of a hand. They called her Eliza. And Holt? He didn't kiss her right away, didn't confess anything. He just built a second saddle rack in the barn, next to his, put her name on it, carved by hand. A gesture that said, "You've got a place here, not just in the barn, in this life." And she saw it, and stayed. The prairie kept breathing. Seasons passed. Coyotes cried at dusk, and the river ran its winding course. And in the small cabin under the cottonwood trees, two souls moved slowly toward each other. No chains, no claims, just mutual respect, and something stronger than love, recognition. To the world, she was too wild. To one man, she was just right. And for the first time in her life, she didn't need to run.